I'm Laura Richcreek with Laura's Voice, and this is Laura Reads Foxed Books. Thanks for joining me. I am so glad you're here. We have another 2-chapter episode this week that introduces a side character playing a small but significant role. As a mom, though, one detail stood out to me, and I want to see if you pick up on it. The idiom, "you have to eat a peck of dirt before you die," came to mind. If you get it, leave a comment. This book is in the public domain. Now, without further ado, let's read chapters 7 and 8 of The Old Gentleman of the Blackstock. Chapter 7, in which Basham Miles loses his hat. I did not meet the old gentleman or see him again on the street for some little time, but one day as I turned into a new street, which had been cut through and built up recently, I saw a figure some distance ahead of me all muffled up and walking with the slow and painful steps of an old man. When I was still about half a block from him, his hat blew off and was caught in a sudden gust of wind and whirled out into the street. He stepped slowly down after it, but before he could reach it, a young girl, who had evidently seen him through a window, opened the door and ran down from one of the little new tidy houses on the opposite side, tripped out into the street, and caught the truant hat and restored it to its owner. And then, as he attempted to wrap his comforter, which had become disarranged, more closely around his neck, she reached up and wrapped it deftly about him herself, tucking it in with great care. And as he thanked her warmly, which I could see even at a distance, she turned, laughing, and tripped back across the street, her brown hair blown about her little head, and ran up the steps into her house, giving me just a glimpse of dainty ankles, which reminded me of Elizabeth Dale that sunny day so long ago. I had recognized old Mr. Basham Miles at a distance as his hat blew off, but I did not recognize the young lady who had rendered him the kindly service. Indeed, I did not see her face. I was sure, however, that she was a stranger, for I knew every girl on the street, by sight at least. I was so busy speculating as to who the graceful stranger was, and looking at her windows as I passed, that I forgot my intention to overtake old Mr. Miles, who might have told me, and he turned the corner before I could catch up to him and went down a cross street, so that I did not get a chance to speak to him. He was walking more rapidly than I had thought. As I was late, I thought it was just as well, for I had observed that when I met him on the street now, he talked more and more about his health, and my chief regret at not having caught him was that I did not learn who the dainty-looking girl was. As it turned out, I discovered later he did not know her. The next time I met him, he referred to the episode himself and asked me to find out who she was and let him know. "She reminded me strongly of someone I knew once, of an old friend of mine," he said, half-reflectively. "These resemblances are very curious." He was speaking now more to himself than to me. I suggested that I might find some difficulty in discovering her. "Difficulty?" he said. "Why, sir, when I was your age, I knew every pretty girl in town." He looked at me keenly. "Was she pretty?" I asked. I did not see her face. "Pretty? She was a beauty, sir. She looked like an angel. And she is a lady. I don't know that a man is a judge of the beauty of a person who runs after and catches his hat for him," he added, his deep eyes lighting faintly with a little half-gleam of amusement. "What between rage and gratitude, he is not in a very judicial temper. But she seemed to me a beauty, and she resembled one who was a beauty. Yes, sir, she was a beauty." And he sighed and turned away. Chapter 8, of a Maker of Mud Pies. Only a day or two after this conversation, I am not sure that it was not the next day, I happened to be passing along a little street out in the same direction with, but several blocks beyond, the quarter where my old friend and I had our residences, on the border of respectability. The ground was so broken there that the street was not half built up, and such houses as there were of the poorest class. As I passed along, my attention was attracted by a little crowd gathered around some object in the middle of the street. They were shouting with laughter, and my curiosity prompted me to go up and look to see what amused them. I found it to be a very small and dirty little boy, who certainly presented an amusing enough spectacle. He was so little that it was wonderful how so much dirt could have found lodgment on so small a person. His clothes were good, better than those of the children around him, but were covered with mud from top to bottom, as if he had been making mud pies, which, indeed, he had been doing, and had proposed to bake them on himself. His hands were caked with mud, and his round face also was plentifully streaked with it. Where it showed through, the skin looked fair and the face delicate and refined. He might have been a muddy Cupid. He did not seem at all disturbed or even disconcerted by the crowd around him, or the amusement he was causing, or the questions put to him. All of them he answered promptly and with perfect coolness. The only difficulty was in understanding him. He was so small that he could not talk plainly. And besides, he was very busy with a most attractive pile of wet sand. There is something in wet sand which no man-child can resist. I wonder if it is not a shred of our heredity from the time when we burrowed in the ground. "What is your name?" they were asking him.
"Burton Avith,"
indifferently, for he was much engaged.
"What?" "Burton Avith,"
in a different key, while he gave a swipe across his face which left new streaks.
"What?
Urton Ale Avith?"
"Nar, Burton Avith,"
with some impatience. They changed the question. "Where do you live?"
"At home."
He returned to his task, the boring of a small tunnel with one little black finger. "Where is that?"
"At home,"
evidently struck with their denseness. "What street?" asked someone.
"Witchin' Street."
Witchin' Street?
"Nor, Witchin' Street."
"Where is that?" the crowd inquired of each other. No one knew. "What did you leave home for, honey?" asked a woman, stooping over him and putting her hand on him. "Went away," he answered promptly, with a reawakening of interest and a sparkle in his blue eyes at the recollection. "Runned away?"
"Mm-hmm,"
with a nod of satisfaction and a dimple at the corner of his little muddy mouth. "What did you run away for?"
"I don't know."
He stood up. At this, a child who had worked its way into the inner circle about him gave a shrill explosion of laughter. Little Mudpie's face flushed suddenly, and he walked up, and doubling his dirty fist, struck the child as hard a blow as he could, which caused a universal shout, and set the children to whirling in the street, screaming with laughter. For the first time the boy showed signs of distress. His little dirty mouth began to pucker, and his little round chin to tremble, and he dug one chubby black fist in his eye.
"Want to home?"
he said in a low voice. "Yes, you shall go. Don't cry, honey." And several women, pressing around him, began to pet him. One of them asked, "Don't you want something to eat? Ain't you hungry?"
"Mm-hmm. Yes, ma'am,"
he said with a little whimper and correction of his manners. "All right, I'll give you something. Come along, and then we'll take you home." On this, several women with motherly kindness began to talk as to which could give him something quickest. "Which way is your home, little man?" I asked, taking advantage of the break in the crowd. He turned and waved his little arm, taking in half the horizon.
"Dat way."
At least it was the half of the horizon toward which I was going. So I said to the women that if they could give him something to eat, I would undertake to get him home safely. This division of labor was acceptable, and the woman who had first suggested feeding him, having given him 2 large slices of bread covered thick with jam, and others having contributed double as much more, I took the little stray's wrist, in default of a hand, both of those members being engaged trying to hold his store of bread, and having taken leave of his friends, we started out westward to find his home. We had not gone more than 50 steps when he said,
"I tired,"
or something as near that as a mouth filled with bread and jam would allow. This was a new phase of the case. I had not counted on this, but as there was no help for it, when he had repeated the statement again, and added the request, "Pete told me," I picked him up, dirt and all, and marched on. It was a little funny, anyhow, to find myself carrying such a bundle of boy and mud, to which was added the fact that every now and then lumps of blackberry jam were being smeared over my clothes and face and stuck in my hair, a process to which the warmth of the day did not fail to contribute its part. But it was only when I got into my own section of the town that I fully appreciated the humorousness of the figure I must cut. I would gladly have put my little Burton down, but he would not be so disposed of. Prosperity is the nurse of arrogance, and under prosperity my little man had grown a tyrant. And whenever I proposed putting him down, he said so firmly,
No, I tired. Pete told me.
that I was forced to go on. The first person I met that I knew was old Mr. Miles. He was muffled up, but yet was walking somewhat more vigorously than when I last saw him on the street. He stopped, in apparent doubt as to my identity, and looked rather pleased as well as amused over my appearance, but expressed no surprise when I made a half-explanation. The child, possibly touched by his pale, thin face, but more probably sensible of his sympathy, suddenly held out his chubby, black hand with a piece of jam-smeared bread in it, and said,
Want some?
It manifestly pleased the old fellow, for he actually bent over and made a pretense of biting off a piece. When I left him, I took a side street. I was going to a police station to learn if any notice had been left there of a lost child, but as I passed through a rather retired street, to avoid observation from people I might know, I heard a musical voice behind me exclaim,
Why, Burton, where on earth have you been?
Something about the voice struck me like a memory from the past. Turning, I stood face to face with Elizabeth Dale. Had she been an angel, I could not have been more overcome. The 3 or 4 years since I had seen her in the milliner's shop had added to her beauty, had filled out her slim, girlish figure, and had given thoughtfulness to her rosy face, and made it gracious as well as sweet. She was too much engrossed with the child, whom I quickly discovered to be her nephew, to notice me at first, and I found myself abandoned by my charge, who immediately deserted me, leaving, however, abundant traces of himself on my person, and climbed into the outstretched arms of his pretty aunt without a word, and began to hug and kiss her with all his might. Nor did I blame him. In fact, I should have liked to be as small as he, to have enjoyed the same blessed privilege. As she turned half away from me with the boy in her arms, I recognized her on the instant as the handsome girl who had picked up old Mr. Miles's hat for him that day in the street. The joyousness of her nature was testified to in her peals of laughter over her little nephew's extraordinary appearance, and her loveliness of character was proven both by the affection with which the child choked and kissed her, and the sweetness with which she received his embraces, muddy and jam-besmeared as he was. All she said was,
Oh, Burton, isn't that enough? You'll ruin Auntie's nice dress.
But Burton only choked and kissed her the harder. I offered to take him and relieve her, but she declined this, and Mudpie would not have come even if she would have let him. He knew when he was well off. He just clung the closer to her, patting her with his chubby hand and rubbing his dirty cheek against her pretty one with delightful enjoyment, saying,
I love my auntie. I love my auntie.
And as she smiled and thanked me with her gracious air for my part in his rescue, I began to think that, faith, I more than half did so too. The next day I met Elizabeth Dale on the street, entirely by accident, on her part. I may almost say it was accidental on my part also, for I had been walking up and down and around blocks for 2 hours before she added her light to the sunshine without. She was gracious enough to stop and give me a message of thanks from her sister, Mrs. Davis, for my kindness to her young prodigal, and she added that if he had not eaten of the husks of the swine, he had, at least, looked as if he had played with them. It was a memorable interview for me, for it was the first time I ever had what might be called a real conversation with Elizabeth Dale. I was guileful and stretched it out, claiming, I remember, a much closer acquaintance with the Reverend Peterkin Davis than I had ever thought before of doing. She even said her sister had written and posted me her thanks, but had commissioned her, if she saw me again, to say she would be very glad to have me call and give her the privilege of thanking me in person. So she was pleased to express it. After that, of course, I felt I could do no less than call, and I was so gracious about giving her sister the privilege she requested that I called that very evening. And as her sister happened to have a headache, and I saw only the younger sister, I called again only a few evenings afterward, for by this time Miss Elizabeth Dale and I were friends, and I now think I was almost beginning to be more. I became, suddenly, a somewhat regular attendant on the Reverend Dr. Davis's church. End of Chapters 7 and 8. This has been The Old Gentleman of the Blackstock by Thomas Nelson Page, illustrated by Howard Chandler Christie. Original copyright 1897. This edition copyright 1901. Production copyright 2025 by Laura E. Richcreek. Thanks for being here. See you next week.